My name is Mary Jo, and this is the Monday Night Film and Lecture Series. So, welcome. We're very excited because tonight, all the way from very, very far north in Canada, we have Dacajeweiah to speak to us. We're excited because we heard him before a few years ago, and we know he's a very dynamic speaker and has a lot to say.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Tom Evans, and I'm down here from the nation state called Canada. And I say it that way because most of the world is now organized by what we know as nation states, like the United States of America, the United Nations, various things, for example, where 60% of its member base is less than 60 years old, whereas most of the true peoples, nations around the world, the thousands, the tens of thousands of them, are thousands of years old, of which none are represented in the United Nations. We're dealing with an issue here tonight that very much involves the organization of the world in this way, and that even the perception of democracy and various things are waning and on the verge of disappearing altogether. The facts that you're going to get here tonight are quite revolutionary in terms of what's been heard about 9/11. How many people here believe the official version of the 9/11 story?
Well, what do you call the official version?
Well, the one that we watched on TV, the one that the government maintains.
You mean the 9/11 Commission?
You know, that terrorists from another country came and did this and completely hoodwinked the most effective intelligence organization on earth and took everybody by surprise and all that kind of stuff. I know for me, I was driving my kids to school on that morning and came on the news, the first plane hitting the news, and my first reaction was this George Orwell's 1984 on the radio, War of the Worlds, freaking everybody out as a story. But I was still open-minded and listening to what was going on and going, man, this is amazing. And then that second plane hit. And I went, no way. There's something bad. There's something wrong here. This is impossible. You know, most people know that what kind of security that exists. You know, that traffic controllers are the most stressed job on the planet because of how many planes are in the air and how important it is that everything fly according to schedule and stay completely on their routes and all this kind of stuff, and the protocols that are in place to ensure that any opportunity 1 degree off course is intercepted immediately, and over 100 interceptions happen a year, as it is over North American skies alone. And here's 45 minutes apart, 2 planes over is 90, 180 degrees off course for 45 minutes an hour, and then a purported third plane and a fourth plane. Although the third plane, when it hit, also, I was watching the TV and I'm like, where's the plane? You know, when it hit the Pentagon, I'm like, where's the plane? I don't see a plane. Every plane crash I've ever seen is carnage. It's just carnage of wreckage and luggage and bodies, and there was nothing there, just a hole that you couldn't even imagine a plane going into. So I was there right away. I've been working with Dacajeweiah for 14 years and with the Indigenous Sovereignty Movement for 28 years. Was in the organic movement when it was a movement for almost 20 years, had the first certified organic food store in North America. A lot of human rights issues. So I had some analysis about it all. And a lot of us started talking about it right away, and we had a little bit of an added opportunity of not being right in the United States. So our ability to watch and analyze was a little more clear-headed. We weren't quite in the middle of it as other people were. You combine these issues with what we're facing into the future, and you know, coming from a university background as well, coming from an educated background, you know, we now have peak oil, we have global warming, we have economic collapse. This country's infrastructure is degrading very rapidly. You're being gutted financially by your government. I mean, it staggers my imagination how everybody just sits back and watches the government steal every last penny that you have, and all in the name of a conservative policy or a conservative ideology that says less government and no waste and all this kind of stuff. So I'm trying to set you up for the information that you're about to get, and it's going to be very, very shocking, and getting to the heart of why this is happening, and that the most important aspect of it is what's coming next. And that our analysis is that it is as likely as not that you will not see another election here in the United States. And if you do, it'll be your last one. And that a world-dominating dictatorship is on the rise that will make Hitler pale. So I'm being pulled, and
Don't give away the punchline.
and we've got to really open our hearts. A quote by Mark Twain that I'll leave you sit with is, never let your schooling interfere with your education. And so educate yourselves right now and take this information and start spreading it far and wide, because there will be no official way of dealing with this. People are going to have to take back their country. Thank you.
So now we have Dr. Julian Cooney, the head of the Africana Study Program here at the university, to introduce Dacajeweiah. And you need to...
Thank you. It's really good to see everybody here. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Voices of Opposition, which has been going on now for almost 5 years. So can we give the group a round of applause? I think it's one of the few organizations in Tucson that continues to tell the truth about what's really going down in the world. It's so hard to find the truth, sometimes even at the university, even though we all are supposed to be, scholars of the truth. The question of 9/11 is moving to all of us. And it's one, of course, that touches me, especially when I think about, firstly, the loss of life and those that died, the innocent people that died on that day. And so whenever there is a loss of life anywhere in this world for no absolute and logical reason, it is troubling to me, regardless of who the people are or who the creatures are, because I think this also connects to the rest of the natural world of which we are an integral part. Brother Dacajeweiah, splitting the sky, as that translates from the traditional Mohawk, is from this land, Turtle Island. We don't like to say New York or Canada, because this entire continent, in fact, belongs to the indigenous people. And he is a historic person in a number of ways. The first is that he is alive today after being on death row, because he was one of the persons convicted for the Attica uprising in 1971. For those of you who were alive then, I think you remember those people who were shot as per some of the orders from Governor Rockefeller. And kind of bringing to light the inhumanity, the barbarism of the prison industrial complex in this country that has never changed. In fact, it has worsened steadily, even now with the explosion of private prisons. Well, Dacajeweiah was one of the historic leaders of that uprising, who was in fact sentenced to death for the shooting of a police officer. He himself, as he recounted yesterday and as he shared with me about 4 years ago, was fortunate to be alive, because as the police officer pointed the gun at him, some of the bullets fell out of the clip and so pointed at his head. But he wouldn't have been here today if it was not the protection of the ancestors, of the indigenous people of this land that protected him. And so he became a very important national political symbol of the national political crisis as a political prisoner in this country. And people called for his release right at the level of the United Nations, including the former mayor of Atlanta, Andrew Young, who called for his release because they viewed him as a political prisoner. And it was fortunate that he was finally able to get out of that situation of captivity, and he dedicated his life to telling the truth about what really goes on in this world through this system, not just about colonialism that is part of the endemic historical structure of this continent and of the world, but also particularly concerned with the violation of people and their rights. And so when we look at the issue of September 11th and what happened, it is principally an issue of human rights. When the rights of people to live are taken away from them because there are those who are in power who lie to us about what happened. And so he has done some very incredible scholarship since 2001. He's also written a book, his autobiography, which I believe is available for sale. And I encourage you to support Dacajeweiah because he has driven 30 hours nonstop from the north. But he has a lot of spiritual energy too. And he's come all the way to talk to us about his research and his concerns and his information about what he has unearthed. And he was part of the resistance to the Canadian Mounted Police and the Canadian federal government at Gustafson Lake in 1995, where people, were able to claim their land, their sovereign land in the north against colonialism. He was one of the primary resistors of that movement. And then, of course, Tom that you just met was also part of that. And so he has a lot to say to us today. And we thank Dacajeweiah, Splitting the Sky, for coming all the way from way up north to bring us the truth, the truth, the truth. And does the truth matter? Yes, I believe the truth matters because we cannot live in this world if we live a lie. Somebody once said a long time ago, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. And so it is with that spirit that we invite Dacajeweiah to the platform. So please join me in welcoming Dacajeweiah.
Greetings, sisters and brothers, tonight assembled. First, I'd like to thank Sister Mary Jo and your organization, Voices of Opposition, Voices Resistance, for inviting me here this evening. We're thanking Dr. Julian Cooney and his family for putting us up in his home and, as ever, being the most gracious hospitality afforded to any human beings. Who has become a great friend and a spiritual ally of mine. I thank my friend Tom here for driving with me and for being there in many different situations. I want to thank you for coming out here tonight because I don't believe that everybody that's out here tonight is FBI or military intelligence. I believe that there are a few in here, unequivocally. And if you're here, that's okay. Because what I have to say to you tonight, and each and every one of you, is going to relieve some of the pressure in your brains about what happened at 9/11. And if tonight, there's no such things as the right or the left to me on 9/11. Because 9/11 is a situation that affects each and every one of us. And you're going to ask yourself, and I'm asking myself, why am I even involved? Why am I even here tonight as a presenter about 9/11? And I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to start with a story, and I'm going to tell you how I came about the information that I have dug up. And as you can see, I've got plenty of papers here, and I've got some pre-recorded tapes that you're going to listen to, and I've passed out some information to people that pulled out the packets that were up front there tonight. There were 60 packets, and so there are probably a lot of people that didn't get the information, but you will get the gist of the information when I speak tonight. I wrote a 650-page autobiography called The Autobiography of Dacajeweiah Splitting the Sky from Attica to Gustafson Lake. There's about 15 copies out there, which I hope you buy me out, because we need the money for gas as we go home. Nobody funds us. Certainly the federal government is not funding me. There are a few people of good heart who have been able to give a couple $100 here and there to keep us on the road and keep us going. But it's a very exhausting work. And it's very dangerous work. I am going to unequivocally state from the very onset that I understand that the information I give you here tonight could possibly and very well get me murdered by the government. But I have no qualms about that because I've beaten death on a number of occasions. And I'm here to talk about it tonight. I don't fear death because I believe in a higher power than myself. My culture teaches me that there is a higher power than myself. If I didn't believe in a higher power that we as spirits embodied would have to answer to at some point after we exhaust this body, I would probably be as bad as any tyrant in the mafia or the government. Why would we need to be moral? And I think that's the problem with those in control, is they don't believe in anything past what Nietzsche has explained to them exists, and that's nothing after the grave. So with that said, I'm letting the power structure right to the top know there is no fear here. Do what you have to do, and I will do what I have to do. Tonight, you stand naked as the emperor, wearing no clothes. On September the 2nd, 2001, I had a young fellow who had seen me from New York, and I'm originally from New York. A young fellow had seen a documentary with me and had given a talk at one of the universities, and I've talked at hundreds of universities, Harvard, Yale, MIT, all over, University of California. I've been here before. And this young man was so inspired by my talk that he asked me to come out. He got a hold of me somehow and asked me to come to New York to come and give a talk. And I said I would come and give this talk. I found out that this young man happened to be related to the Rockefellers. Unbelievably. This guy was very wealthy, and he put up funds for me to travel to give a talk or to help promote my book. He brought my family, my 2 children, Rainbow and Che, and my wife. She keeps the door, who was a co-author in the book. So we get on a plane and we fly to New York and we take all of our books, and we are housed by this gracious, beautiful young man who I found to be incredibly beautiful, based on the fact that I was involved in the 1971 Attica Rebellion, and I lived through the bloody assault. I wasn't convicted of shooting a cop. I was accused of hitting a cop who eventually died 2 days later during the uprising at the age of 19. I was later found not guilty, but only after almost going to the electric chair and watching Rockefeller's gunslingers coming in and murdering 43 people in cold blood. A massacre of the worst kind. And facing 2 state troopers who had a gun in my hand, a rifle in my face, and pulled the trigger, and the clip fell out. the other state troopers with their gas masks looked at this particular guy, looked at me, and looked at the guy that had the gun, and their eyes were wide. They couldn't believe that the clip fell out. So they hit me across the face and knocked me over the catwalk, and I fell down onto the handball court and almost broke my back and passed out. When I awoke, 43 people were murdered in cold blood, and 80 people were wounded and maimed for life, and including myself, I was grazed by other bullets, 00 Buck. That said, this young man here who brought me into New York housed us 1.5 blocks away from the Twin Towers in the World Financial Center. We were on the 26th floor, and we were at that place. We were in that particular hotel for 8 days before 9/11 happened. Now, I was supposed to go up to Montreal and give a talk in McGill University on September the 15th. This young man offered us to stay there as long as we wanted to past September the 9th. We had the book signing at SOB's in the Village on the 9th. Originally, he was going to have it on the 15th, but I told him I had to be up in McGill University in Quebec and Montreal on the 15th, so we pushed it up to the 9th. That time it was the 30th anniversary of the taking of Attica in 1971. Anyways, we stayed there. We gave a talk. We had a performance. We raised a few bucks. We sold a few books. We made some connections. And on September the 10th, my children had asked me if we could go to the top of the Twin Towers the next days. And I said, well, you know, I don't know. I got this really weird feeling about them buildings. Something didn't sound right, because on the 9th, that evening, I looked out the 26th floor of the World Financial Center, and I was looking at the Twin Towers at night. And I saw this clouds around the top, and I could see the lights above that and the radio TV antennas. And I thought it had the eeriest energy around it, and I said something very terrible is going to happen there. I don't know what it is. I could just feel something was not right. Have you ever had the feeling something was going to go wrong, and in fact, that day it came, something went wrong? Well, I had that feeling. So I said, no, you know what? I says, on the 9th, I actually said, instead of going to the Twin Towers, right, I said, we'll go up to the top of the Empire State Building. And I took them up there, and well, we went up there, and they saw New York, and they saw Jersey, and the whole lot from the sky, and that was a big thrill for them. And it was a good thing. On the 10th, something told me, get out of New York. Get out of New York. Get out right now. We put in 26 boxes of books, put them inside this van, inside of a trailer that we had, a little U-Haul. We got in, and we started booking out of New York City on the 10th. We didn't stay for the extra 2 days we could have stayed there. As we moved out, I could just feel and look at this energy in New York, and it was just something not right. By the time we drove all the way up to Montreal and stayed at a friend of ours from the Kahnawake Mohawk territory. By the way, one of my brothers was a Mohawk foreman of a Mohawk crew that built the Twin Towers. There were many, many Mohawks that were involved in building the Twin Towers. And how many of you know that the Twin Towers had a nickname, David Nelson Rockefeller? That was a nickname. So we get up to Montreal. The next day, we hear about this horrible, horrible, horrendous event. And then we look and we see many people leap into their deaths before those buildings collapsed. So in my mind, from that point on, I figured we could have been in those Twin Towers. we could have been turned to pulverized dust like everything else did in those Twin Towers. We could have died there, my whole family. And even my son Dylan, he had pneumonia. If we had stayed one more day and didn't go up the towers and still had all that dust and all that asbestos, if he had breathed that in, he himself would have died. And we'd have been trapped. We'd have never got out of there for a while. So there was a nagging question. To me, I didn't believe for 1 second when I heard about the Twin Towers that some conspiratorial theory about 19 Arabs, Saudi Arabians, hitting that tower and causing those towers to come down. There was absolutely no way in my mind that I could conceive or believe, and knowing the system and knowing the tyrants behind government that I do, from all my years of activism in this movement, my first assumption from the moment I read that that building was laced with asbestos, I said somebody wanted to dump those buildings. And somebody, then I found out later that those buildings, somebody had made trillions of dollars in put option stocks. Automatically, my mind said, if I were David Rockefeller and I owned those buildings, and them buildings were laced with asbestos, and it would cost me $1 trillion to take those buildings down and get the asbestos out according to state law, and being the oil tycoon that I am, and the economic czar of the world that I am, along with Lord Rothschild from England, it would be more convenient for me to blow those towers and watch them collapse and watch 3,000 people die in those towers and blame it on Arabs to justify an incursion into the Mideast to get Mideast oil from Iraq, from Iran, from Syria, from Lebanon, and from China eventually. To get Mideast oils and resources and to run pipelines from Afghanistan to Pakistan. Whatever that means. But of course, you got to have facts to back and substantiate those allegations. Well, you know, I'm going to go right in. For 6.5 years, I've been studying. I've been on the internet with my one little finger here, typing in, Googling in everything, and studying what people have said about 9/11. And the first thing I read is an article by Tom Flacco. Have you heard of him? Flacco? F-L-O-C-C-O, Tom Flacco. He wrote 3 articles. He wrote the first article called Investment, Espionage, and the White House. Bush administration links to pre-9/11 inside trading. In this article, he wants to know, and I got highlights, and I'm just going to syntax it for you, with your permission. He wants to know why billions of dollars were traded in put option stocks. Is there anybody that doesn't know what that means in here tonight? Basically, what put option stocks are is you gamble that a certain corporation, the stocks are going to fall. And you make a bet with somebody that they're going to fall, and that person says, oh, Jesus, the stocks are never going to fall in that corporation. It's just doing too good. And so you say, okay, I'll put a put option stock. You're betting, you're gambling 100 to 1 that corporation is going to go down. If somebody knows those corporations that are inside that building and the buildings are going down, and those airlines are going down, they put up a put option stock, and somebody has lost billions of dollars on Wall Street in insider trading. It's horrible, but it's been done many times throughout history. So what happens? Tom Falco says, 2 people from the FBI were suspected of insider trading. It's in this article. But turned out to be patsies. He goes on to say there was a guy by the name of Buzzy Krongard, who was the number 3 man in the Bush administration's CIA under George Tenet. And he says that Buzzy Krongard, who used to work for A.B. Brown, went to be the number 3 man in the CIA investigating inside trading. But Buzzy Krongard was listed as one of the beneficiaries of millions of dollars of put option stocks. Today, he also happens to be the chief CEO of Blackwater, Inc. And I think you know how dangerous they are. And I say to myself, well, geez, okay, well, here you got a guy that's made millions of dollars, and if you follow the money, you've already got a main suspect. I mean, it should be easy for a joint congressional body with the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, all these intelligence bodies, military intelligence. It should be nothing, absolutely nothing, to get an indictment against this guy, follow the money, and see who all these other people's that benefited. Nothing. Why? Because there is a clause in his office called portage, which means he can't investigate himself. It's the same thing with the Carlyle Group, which I know that rings bells. They cannot be investigated for any insider trading. So I said, geez, all right, if these guys, the NSA, the NSA said, according to that article, the NSA said, well, we won't investigate. We're not going to investigate Americans who might have been involved in put option stock tradings of the Twin Towers. Why? Because we might get sued. We're not supposed to spy on Americans. When has that ever been a factor? Except that somebody higher and above them said, you better not investigate, or you're going to get hurt, boys. Okay, so then I read another story. I read about a gentleman by the name of Bill Bergman. Has anybody heard of him? Bill Bergman was another person who raised questions about 9/11 in his investigative capacity. The put option stocks that were traded in July and August of 2001, Bill Bergman asked the question and was wondering why there was no investigation, whether it was through the Congress or through the intelligence bodies, of the put option stocks. He worked for the Chicago Federal Reserve. He was fired. Okay, I said, well, geez, why'd they fire that guy? Why did they fire this guy here? I read about another guy who worked for a company called Silverstream, and he also worked for Marsh and McMillan. His name was Richard Andrew Grove. He was fired for snooping into put option stocks. I'm saying to myself, well, how come these established people are being fired around put option stocks? And if I go back to Thomas Flacco, and Thomas Flacco said that the SEC refused to investigate the put option insider trading. And that they had a control list of corporations that benefited but they refused to release it. They happened to accidentally release the list of the corporations to the Canadian SEC, who let it out, and there was a gentleman who worked for the Vancouver Sun by the name of Ian Mulgrew, who wrote an article and released the names of the corporations. Have anybody ever heard of the names of the corporations that were involved in put option stocks? Inside trading. Is there anybody here that has heard of them? All 38. Would you like to hear them? All right, well, okay, let's go over the list. All right, we got Merrill Lynch. We got AMR Corp. Viacom, by the way, owns that. American Express, Viacom. American International Group, owned by Rockefeller. Oh, by the way, I have triple X's. If anybody's got the papers, I got triple X's next to them. If you see a triple X next to those names of those corporations, they're either owned by Lord Rothschild or David Rockefeller. And how do I know that? I'll jump ahead here for a second. Because I wondered why they fired that guy from the Chicago Federal Reserve. So then I asked myself, I Googled it, I said, well, who owns the Federal Reserve? And lo and behold, there's a list of David Rockefeller and Lord Rothschild owning the Federal Reserve and all of the corporate holdings. And I found out that the list that I've got of the corporations that benefited from put option stocks matched 25 of the names listed in the corporate holdings of these two individuals at the top of the economic pinnacle. AXA, SA, Bank of America Corp., Bank of New York Corp., Bank One Corp., Bear Stearns Corp., Boeing Corp., Carnival Corp., Chubb Corp., Cigna Corp., Citigroup, AOL, Time Warner, John Deutsch, CAN, Financial Corp., Continental Airlines, Inc., L3 Communications Holdings, Lehman Brothers, Lockheed Martin, Lone Star Technologies, LTV Corp., Delta Airlines, General Motors Corp., Hercules Inc., Marshall McLellan, MetLife, Morgan Stanley Dean, Witter, Northwest Airlines, Progressive Corp., Raytheon, Royal Caribbean Cruises, Royal Sun Alliance, Southwest Airlines Corp., United Airlines Corp., U.S. Airways Group, Vernado Realty Trust, W.R. Grace and Company, New York Times, XL Capital Ltd. Well, here you have it. What I just said to you here, and if you Google in Federal Reserve, who owns it, you'll get the matching list of people who would have stood to watch those towers go down. Does that make sense to anybody here?
Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit more on the connection and how does a person make money out of the tower going down?
Well, I've said already, put option stocks. Somebody gambled from each and every one of them corporations and made billions of dollars in put option stocks trading, insider trading.
But do we know who?
I just told you who. I just told you who. I told you who owns the Federal Reserve. David Rockefeller, Lord Rothschild. 20 of the names of their corporations match the names of those who benefit from the put option stocks at 9/11. I just told you now who was at the pinnacle of put option stock trading on 9/11 of those buildings. I also stated that those buildings were laced with asbestos. Dresser Industries is the one that sprayed those buildings with asbestos. That Dresser Industry was getting bombarded with lawsuits, asbestos lawsuits, and guess who took over Dresser Industries? Halliburton. So Halliburton stood to get sued. Who was the chief CEO for Halliburton in the late 1990s? Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney's a good friend of David Rockefeller's, George Bush Sr. Everybody knows that George Bush Sr. was behind the Bay of Pigs in Operation 40, or don't you know that? who ordered the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. The Cubans and the Texans that Richard Nixon was always talking about in the Watergate tapes was George Bush and Zapata Oil, Pepsi, Standard Oil, ExxonMobil. Everybody lost during the Cuban Revolution. Nixon promised if they financed his election that he would, in fact, deal with those with Fidel Castro. They would invade and they would restore power to Batista, but it didn't happen that way. E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis were indicted. Most people don't know, but were indicted for killing John F. Kennedy, but never went to jail for it. They also happened to be two of the bums that were shown in the Zapruder film being taken away from the train station. And why did I say that? Well, if a Bush could orchestrate the murder of a president and blow the minds of people worldwide on national TV, then why couldn't Bush, who was worked for Dresser Industries before he went to Zapata Oil, team up with Dick Cheney and get rid of that insurance liability at the Twin Towers on 9/11? Drop those towers, blame it on 19 Saudi Arabians, make billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, put option stocks, and justify a presence in the Mideast as well as installing military bases worldwide. Does that make sense to anybody, or do I sound like a conspiratorial nut? Because I'm not a conspiratorial theorist. If anything, I have become a coincidental expert. You know, you're not showing enough enthusiasm here. Please, let that sound, let the sound of this, let them know you're here. Let them know you're here. Let them know you believe what you're hearing, not what you've been told. If you don't believe, that's okay. I'm not here to convert nobody. I'm only here to sound a warning. That warning is the rise of the Fourth Reich in America. If you don't believe so.
There are photographs of George Bush Sr.
Excuse me?
Dallas during the assassination.
Absolutely.
He was there.
Absolutely.
Giving orders.
It was him. Absolutely. He denies it, but he was there. Herbert Hoover even said he was there.
There's pictures.
Yeah. Oh, J. Edgar Hoover, not Herbert Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover even said he was there in his memos. Okay. Now I'm going to ask Sister Mary Jo, is she here? To come up. I got a little tape I want to play for you while I get my voice back together. You don't mind if I cheat a little bit, right? I had to pre-record this in order to get you proper information. Is that okay with you? Is that all right? I don't want to give you any BS. All right? You've had enough of that. We've all had enough of that in our life. All right? I'm giving you the straight goods. I hope you're here to get the straight goods because you want to hear the truth. What you're going to hear right now is going to take 30 minutes of your time. All right? And let me tell you what you're going to hear. I did a pre-recording of an article. I took excerpts from an article that was written by the chief labor executive, Morgan Reynolds. Have you heard that name? He worked for George Bush in his first administration. He said 9/11 was a murderous inside job. Okay? He is going to present some facts that even includes my political nemesis, Rudy Giuliani. And you say to yourself, well, how is Rudy Giuliani your political nemesis? Well, he tried to use me in his second bid for the mayor of New York against Ruth Messenger because her roommate happened to host a wine and cheese for me when I got out and raised a couple $1,000 for me and my family. And he's trying to say that she was hosting a wine and cheese for a cop killer. And I told CBS and I told CBC up in when they interviewed me, I says, well, you know, Rudy Giuliani can kiss my sweet mohawk behind. First thing he can do. And the next thing he can do, I tell him, Mr. Giuliani, that little attack will come back to haunt him, because I can tell you unequivocally tonight that Rudy Giuliani was involved with his Operation Tripod. He had the Office of Emergency Management, which was a bunker to protect himself against the effects of those towers coming down by remote drones. By remote drones. Now we can go into that too, if you want to. Right now, Giuliani and FEMA just happen to have a drill for the eventuality of an anthrax attack. The drill is called Operation Tripod for September the 12th. At the same time, Cheney just happened to have a bunch of planes in the sky in operations, Northern Vigilance, and a bunch of operations, drills in case the Twin Towers were to be hit. But there was 2 live planes that got through remote control, drones. Giuliani made sure that nobody could investigate. Nobody could investigate the crime scene. 30-foot pieces of massive steel, that which didn't get vaporized, and here's I'm leading to a point here. That which didn't get vaporized. What kind of heat could have caused the complete vaporization of metal, of cement, of human bodies? Was it thermite explosions? Yeah, but you know, there's more than that. Was it diesel fuel from planes? I can't hear you. No. You're right. And thermite is partially right. But I'm going to introduce unequivocal evidence by a so-called schematic anonymous insider who basically says that he was on the inside and helped set up with the possible teams, many teams of military intelligence and explosive experts. Are there any engineers and builders in here dealing with explosives? Architectural, structural engineers here?
I'm not. However, I talked with a gentleman who identified himself as having military destruction, whatever the name is, experience. And he said when he saw the first images on TV of the pillars from the ground up, the rows maybe 40, 50 feet, he noticed that at least many were cut at a 60-degree angle. Well, let me finish. Which is ideal. That's how demolition experts work, because you cut it across and you just stand there.
Right.
And secondly, the molten steel acts like a lubricant and just slides off.
Yes.
So that's a smoking gun to him, and he's just like a sergeant. He's not like a CIA insider. So there's got to be thousands and thousands of people if they paid attention.
Yes.
And that's the point. You got to pay attention.
You're
to what's
absolutely
going on.
right.
Don't ignore it.
Yes, you're absolutely right, my friend.
Hey, don't listen to rap music.
Yeah.
Turn on the news.
Yes.
And make sure it is news, not
Yeah.
rap.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, I agree with you. And I'm going to end off with this. The ex-Italian president intel agencies know 9/11 is an inside job. The president, by the name of the former Italian president, whose name is Francisco Cossiga, says that 9/11 was an inside job. And he should know, because he was one of the architects of a false flag operation known as Operation Gladio. Okay? There have been hundreds, and if not thousands, of people who have come out, credible experts in intelligence, in the military, in the government, that have come out and said 9/11 was an inside job. There can't be thousands of people that are lunatics or crazy. Those thousands of peoples and those thousands of unnamed peoples, like you and I, know that it was an inside job. There's a guy by the name of Captain Eric H. May, who, in a synopsis, critiques many of the former military personnel who have stated 9/11 was an inside job. He says, prepare for another 9/11 explosion to dwarf 9/11. He said, get ready for it, because they have to have it. Empire is going down. Expect it to happen whether in Houston, Portland, or Chicago. He says, watch the Sears building. I didn't say it, he said it. D. In conclusion, I'm going to read a statement my friend wrote, we concurred on, and it goes like this. The rise of the fourth Reich is well upon us. It is vital to realize that the players I'm talking about here concerning 9/11 represent scores of centuries of empire building. Regardless of purported affiliation with Christianity and such, they are all members and proponents of ancient mystical societies, cultivating a notion of power and superiority and providing the necessary connections for developing economic and social control. The Bohemian Grove in California has been in operation for a century or more as a link to the history of similar mystically imbibed places and ceremonies in Europe. It is a fundamental place where alliances and decisions are made and where sworn allegiance is maintained. On the playlist of members in attendance are such things as cross-dressing, ritual sacrifice to horned gods and fire, and sexual dalliance. On the members list are such notables as the Bushes, Greenspan, Reagan, Walter Cronkite, Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, Newt Gingrich, and Karl Rove. Concepts of master race, supremacy, eugenics, Nazism were around long before the Second World War. Just ask the Buffetts, Rothschilds, and the Rockefellers. Remind yourself of the KKK. Hitler was a cult personality deeply committed to the mystical occults and very cognizant of the eugenics movements and immigration policies of the United States propagated in the early decades of the last century. Realize that the men who penned "All men are created equal" had hundreds of slaves at the time. The definition of a man or a human being can be very subjective. The men behind 9/11 are the men behind the formation of and actually own the Federal Reserve, indebting every American to them. They make astronomical money on wars, selling to and controlling both sides of conflicts. During Hitler and the Second World War, companies like Westinghouse, General Electric, General Motors, and IG Farben sold to everybody. Thomas Watson and IBM supplied the technology to number and track the bodies of the concentration camps. Prescott Bush, George W.'s grandfather, worked with such organizations as the Union Banking Corporation, administering and laundering Hitler's and Nazi money. Leading up to the Second World War, Nazism was very popular in the U.S., and all these 9/11 players were part of its glamours. False flag operations were also common. In fact, Hitler consolidated power by deliberately burning the Reichstag parliament and blaming it on the communists, and ultimately invading Poland. 9/11 in Iraq, ? All of the subsequent arguments for cleansing sprang from a socio-economic climate similar to today concerning ethnicity, immigration, foreign outsourcing, etc. In fact, this whole system is predicated on an endless cycle of war and cleansing to keep it going. Many of the grandfathers of today's oligarchs had Nazi connections and sympathies. In 1934, a plot was uncovered involving DuPont, Remington, Morgan, and Bush to assassinate FDR and put in a Reich-style dictatorship and martial law. They were never charged. Karl Rove is the grandson of Karl Rover, who was a Nazi state party chairman. The father of Arnold Schwarzenegger, governor of California and poster boy for the New World Order, was a Nazi SS officer. The Terminator uses Hitlerisms in his speeches and is clearly on record as not being a Nazi apologist. I say to you tonight, my friends and relatives, brothers and sisters, the reason I come here tonight was not to convert anyone to believe anything I had to say, but was just to say that a 6th grade dropout took the time to investigate 6 years of research to come to the conclusions that people stood and made money, billions of dollars of profits, to get rid of insurance liabilities of asbestos, who used hydrogen bombs to blow the place. They did it, and they didn't care about anybody who was in those buildings. And I came here to say I could have been in that building with my family. But then I also came here to tell you, you could have been in those buildings, or that if other false flag operations like this again here in this country, you could be in a similar building or setting that will get you killed. And I'm here to just say to you, open your eyes, pass the information on.
And do what?
And do what? Do what? That is, I'll tell you what,
I was in 1971, I was in Washington, D.C., protesting a war, and to me, the whole protest was set up by the United States government so they could find out who the activist is. These cameras scare the hell out of me. These cameras, now you want. What can we do? I've known about this since 9/11. What can we do? They have the power to take out the president. They can turn off the juice so you can't feed your children. What can we do?
Well, you know what? That is for each individual to work it out themselves. But let me tell you this, what I believe, and that's a good question. That's a good question. That's a damn good question. That is the question. That's why we're here. Okay? That is the question. I tell you, each and every person has to work out what it is they're going to deal with this. But first of all, we must be armed with information and correct information. I suggest, my personal feelings is that there might be some kind of salvation, the same way that good Americans who believed in the Constitution of the United States rose up against Nazism in Hitler Germany in the Second World War. Those same people will be critically looking at and ready to engage the United States of government in the rise of the Fourth Reich. And that's why I say I don't stand in opposition to military personnel. I don't stand in opposition to military experts, former generals, who all are saying it was a 9/11 job and saying it needs to be contended and dealt with. I stand with the families that lost bodies, that lost family at 9/11. I stand with those families that are subsequently losing soldiers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and around the world as a repercussion of the extension of this brutal, horrendous crime. I don't have all the answers, but what I have done is answered a few things and hope that I have been able to share this with you and just give you a bit more knowledge, right, and deciding how we're going to deal with it. And I believe that each and every one of us has individual will, and we have our own minds, and we have our own intelligence, and we have the ability to think and to see and to be able to respond to that which is imminent. However it comes, you're armed with information. And all I can say to you is that I've done the best that I could to say what I feel from my knowledge, from my experience. And I've just come to share that with you, and that's all I have to say. And I thank you very much for